things happen. Supposing 10 years later, you fast forward now, or 15 years later, this good kid, he completed his graduation, did not have many means, so he remained in the college as a clerk. This bad fellow, he somehow managed to finish his graduation. His father happened to be the local politician. He became a legislator, then became Minister of Education, and then came to the same college as a chief guest to deliver an address. Now, what kind of a message are we sending? That good behavior does not pay. The bulk of the people who are inherently neither good nor bad, they then tend to gravitate in the direction where they see the most benefit. There is no risk in bad behavior, but there could be huge rewards. So the challenge is, how do you build an institutional framework in society or through religious order, and most of all, through a system of laws and rules of behavior? Because if we don't do that, if we keep on moralizing all the time, things will not change dramatically. Remember, during Krishna's time, there was Kamsa. During Ram's time, there was Ravana. There was no age of great virtue without any sin. In all ages, we have good and evil coexisting. The challenge is, how do you build institutions and mechanisms, social, political, by which the individual gain and societal good, they both can go hand in hand. One is not at the cost of the other. I use the word sin. I don't know if there's a God. I have a policy of mutual non-interference with God. I do not much bother about God's existence as long as God doesn't bother about my existence. But I do believe there is sin. There are two great sins. The first great sin is unfulfilled potential. If nature endowed a child with a certain potential, that if that child is given an opportunity, she could become a great artist, or a manager, or a thinker, or a writer, or any number of things. But if that potential is not fulfilled, because we as a society are dumb enough not to give that child the opportunity, then that is a sin. The second great sin is avoidable suffering. You know, there are some sufferings that cannot be avoided. Death, at some stage or other, is inevitable. Old age, it accompanies death. We all pretend after a certain age that we are not really old, but we do age eventually. Some incurable disease, we hope that we will not be afflicted by that. But if we are afflicted by it, there's nothing much we can do about it. But barring these, most of the suffering is fully avoidable. And yet, in this country, look at these two things. Some 80% of children in this country, their future is sealed at birth by the circumstances of birth. If you pretend to be an astrologer, if you go to a home where a child is born, and if you look at the house, the parents' education, their economic status, and if you make a prediction that this child after 25 years is most likely to become this. In 80% cases, you would be proved to be right. And that's a greater success rate than any astrologer can ever boast of. In other words, birth has predictable consequences. The accident of the womb, as Warren Buffett called, the circumstances of birth are determining the future of a child. in a substantial number of cases, because we deny the bulk of our people a decent measure of education. I don't want to go into numbers and statistics. That's not important now, but we all know. Take the suffering part. We know every year in this country, almost 250,000 children, 250,000 children, they are born with a preventable congenital abnormality. Preventable congenital abnormality. Maybe no eyesight or no hearing, and therefore dumbness that follows necessarily, or heart disease or limbs malformed. This is all because of one infection that the mother suffers during pregnancy called rubella. Have you heard of rubella? How many have heard of it? German measles or rubella. Have you heard of the vaccine called MMR? The R stands for rubella. Mumps, measles, and rubella. It's a commonly available vaccine. We are lucky. If you have to vaccinate all would-be mothers before pregnancy against rubella, it will cost no more than 20 to 25 crores in this country annually. If you spend that 25 crores, 250,000 children would be born without these congenital afflictions. Do you know how much money is spent by the governments in this country every day? Anybody has an idea? Anybody? The government spends 5,000 crore rupees a day. A day. 5,000 crore rupees a day. Sundays, festivals, holidays included. Including IPL, as I said. And that's 200 crore plus an hour. What it means is, if we spend public money equivalent to 7.5 minutes expenditure every year, we could save 250,000 children from preventable congenital abnormalities of this kind. Now, to me, there is no greater sin than this. If you measure a country's, a society's sin by these two yardsticks, I would say India is home to the greatest sum total of all sin in the world. But the good news is, both these can be easily corrected. The good news is we have the technology, we have the resources. The challenge is, do we have the will? Do we have the skill? That brings me to my final point, because I want to give time for interaction. Is it the individual? Because last 24 hours I've been interacting with friends here, we've been discussing. Is it the individual, an individual sense of morality? Or is it institutions, and where do they inflect? Where do they intersect? It's both. It's both because it's individuals who are capable of providing leadership that transform the world. If we do not ignite the minds of these individuals,